One of the greatest movie stars in the history of Hollywood is gone.
Elizabeth Taylor had 7 husbands, 2 Oscars, and diamonds worth millions. But nobody ever told you the truth about her children. A daughter who never even got to meet her father. A son whose marriage ended in one of the most shocking scandals of the AIDS era. A child who spent her entire childhood in a hospital bed. And a secret that Elizabeth Taylor took years to confront. 4 children. 4 stories that Hollywood buried for decades. What really happened behind closed doors will leave you speechless. This is the truth they never wanted you to know. She had 4 of them. Each one came into her life under different circumstances. Each one had a different father, and each one grew up carrying a version of the Taylor name that the public knew almost nothing about.
Maggie the cat is alive! I'm alive! Why are you afraid of the truth?
The stories of those 4 children are not the stories that made the front pages. They are quieter than that, and in some ways more interesting for it. To understand what those 4 lives actually looked like, you have to start at the beginning. Not with the children themselves, but with the world they were born into and what that world demanded of them, simply by existing in it. Elizabeth Taylor was born on February the 27th, 1932, in London. Her parents were American, and when the Second World War began to reshape Europe, the family relocated to Los Angeles. What happened next moved fast. Taylor was signed to MGM as a child, and she did not have the slow, uncertain beginnings that most actors describe. She arrived in the industry already striking, already compelling, and within a few years she was one of the most recognizable faces in the country. By the time she was a teenager, she was a star. By the time she was in her early 20s, she was something closer to an institution. She became a mother for the first time in January 1953, when she was 20 years old. At that point, she was already so well known that the birth itself was reported in newspapers. This is the environment that her children entered. From the moment each of them was born, they existed inside a story that was already being written by other people. Photographers were interested in them, gossip columnists mentioned them. Their mother's relationships, her marriages, her rumored affairs, her film contracts, all of it created a context around them that they had no say in and no way to escape. What this meant practically was that they were never entirely private people. That is not a complaint, it is simply the reality of what it meant to be born into that particular family at that particular moment in Hollywood history. The press followed Taylor everywhere, and her children existed within the frame of that attention, whether they wanted to or not. The physical circumstances of their childhood added another layer of disruption. Taylor worked constantly, and her work took her around the world. The children grew up in houses in Los Angeles, in Switzerland, and in England. They attended schools in different countries, sometimes with different languages, navigating new environments and new social rules with a frequency that would unsettle most adults, let alone children. When their mother was filming, they might be in the care of nannies or staying with other family members, or settling temporarily in a boarding school while she was on location. The geography of their childhood was not stable. The men in their lives changed too. Taylor married 7 times in total, and each marriage brought a new presence into the household, a new person occupying the role of partner to their mother, some of whom were warm and involved, and some of whom were not. Stepfathers came and went. Relationships that seemed permanent turned out not to be. The consistency that children tend to rely on, the fixed points around which a stable life is built, was harder to find in the Taylor household than in most. And yet, by the accounts of people who knew the family well, Taylor worked hard against all of that. William J. Mann, a biographer who spent years researching her life and spoke at length with her son Christopher, found that Taylor was protective of her children in ways that rarely made the press. She did not use them as props at public events. She did not bring them to premieres as a way of generating positive coverage. When she was home and present, she was genuinely present. She created traditions. Easter celebrations with animals in the garden. Birthday parties that the grandchildren were still talking about decades later. She tried, in the time she had, to build something that felt like a home. Whether she succeeded is a question her children would each answer differently depending on the year you asked them. What is clear is that no amount of effort on her part could fully insulate 4 children from the reality of their circumstances. The upheaval was structural. It was built into the life she led, and by extension, into the lives they led alongside her. there is something else that runs through all four of their stories, something that begins early in each case and takes a different form each time. It is grief, not always the grief of death, though that is there too, starting earlier and more violently in one case than any child should have to face. But also the grief of absence, of instability, of growing up knowing that the world outside had a very firm idea of who you were before you had any idea yourself. The eldest son lost the consistency of his father's presence almost before he could register it. The second son married into a crisis that would eventually reshape his mother's entire public life. The eldest daughter lost her father to a plane crash when she was 7 months old and grew up knowing him only through photographs and stories. And the youngest child, who came into the family not by birth but by adoption, arrived with a physical condition so serious that just learning to walk required years of surgery and recovery. These are the four stories. They share a mother, a surname, and a particular kind of pressure that comes with being seen as part of someone else's legend. What they did with all of that, the lives they built on the other side of everything they went through, is what this is really about. Of all the losses that touched Elizabeth Taylor's family, the one that arrived first came without warning and left the least room for preparation. It happened on a Tuesday morning in March 1958, over the desert of New Mexico, and it changed the shape of the family before the youngest member of it was old enough to understand what shape meant. Liza Todd was 7 months old when her father died. She had been born on August 6, 1957, the only child of Elizabeth Taylor and her third husband, Mike Todd. Her full name was Elizabeth Frances Todd, but she was called Liza almost immediately, a small distinction from her mother that would come to feel appropriate over time, given how differently the two of them would eventually choose to live. She arrived into what seemed, by the standards of Taylor's life up to that point, like a moment of genuine stability. Her parents were married, her father was at the height of his career, and the family appeared to have found something that resembled solid ground. Mike Todd was not a man who did anything quietly. He was a Hollywood producer, large in personality and appetite, known above all for the 1956 film Around the World in 80 Days, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture and cemented his reputation as someone who thought on a scale most people found exhausting just to observe. He was 25 years older than Taylor, extravagant in his spending, and by all available accounts, completely devoted to her. Taylor later wrote about their relationship with a warmth that was specific and unconditional. She described how her sense of herself expanded under his attention, how he made her feel seen in a way that went beyond the surface. He did not ask her to marry him. According to Taylor, he told her they were getting married, and she found that entirely irresistible. They married in February 1957 in Acapulco, Mexico, with Taylor already pregnant with Liza. When Liza arrived that August, the family seemed settled. Todd was working. Taylor was filming and traveling and collecting jewels and living at a pace that would have worn most people down, but seemed to suit her. Liza was their daughter, their only child together, and the people around the family at the time described her as cherished in the uncomplicated way that new babies in happy households tend to be. Then came March 22nd, 1958. Mike Todd boarded his private plane, a twin-engine Lockheed Lodestar that he had named the Lucky Liz, at Burbank Airport in California, bound for New York. Taylor had wanted to travel with him. She had asked to go more than once, but she was ill with a cold, and Todd insisted she stay home and rest. In the hours before the flight, he was on the phone with friends, describing the plane as perfectly safe and making the kind of jokes that people make when they are relaxed and not thinking about risk. The plane went down near Grants, New Mexico. An engine failed. Icy conditions at high altitude combined with an aircraft that was carrying more weight than it should have been, and the Lucky Liz went out of control. Everyone on board was killed. Mike Todd was 50 years old. Taylor was 26. She was a widow with a 7-month-old daughter and 2 other small children from her previous marriage, and by every account of the people around her at the time, the news broke her in a way that nothing before had. She later described the moment she was told as a kind of physical collapse. She could not process what she was hearing. She screamed. In the weeks that followed, she said the only way she could get through a day was by working, by stepping into a character and leaving her own life behind long enough to function. Liza, of course, had no understanding of any of this. She was 7 months old. She would grow up knowing her father only through photographs, through stories told by other people, through the particular quality of grief that her mother carried for years after and never entirely set down. The loss was real and total, but it was not something Liza could mourn in the direct way that older children might. It was simply an absence, the shape of something that should have been there and was not. Richard Burton came into the picture several years later when Taylor fell in love with him on the set of Cleopatra in 1962. They married in March 1964, and Burton formally adopted both Liza and Maria, Taylor's youngest child, as part of the new family he was joining. For Liza, Burton became the father figure she had never had, and by the accounts of people who observed the family, he took that role seriously. He was not a distant or performative presence. He was involved. He was warm with the children in ways that sometimes surprised people who knew him only from his public image, which was considerably more guarded. Growing up in that household meant growing up between worlds, film sets and boarding schools in Switzerland, summers in one country and terms in another. A mother who was simultaneously one of the most famous women on the planet, and someone who, by most accounts, tried hard to be a real parent when she was home. Liza navigated all of that while also being, in her own temperament, a person who was genuinely different from the environment she had been born into. Where Taylor was expressive and public and drawn to spectacle, Liza was quiet. Where her mother collected attention the way other people collect objects, Liza seemed to find attention uncomfortable. She was not drawn to performance. She was not interested in being seen. What she was interested in was form, in physical objects, in the kind of work that happens in silence in a studio rather than in front of a camera or an audience. She studied at Hornsey, College of Art in London, and at the Art Institute in Los Angeles, and she became a sculptor. Not a dabbler or a dilettante using a famous surname to open gallery doors, but a working sculptor with a serious body of work and a genuine reputation in her field. She became particularly known for her equine sculptures, her recreations of famous horses rendered in bronze with a level of anatomical precision and emotional accuracy that drew serious attention from collectors and institutions. Among her most celebrated pieces is a work dedicated to the champion racehorse Secretariat, which has been exhibited across the United States and Europe. It is hard to think of a life that looks less like Elizabeth Taylor's and more like its own thing. The contrast is not incidental. Liza built that life deliberately, in full knowledge of what the alternative looked like, and she chose the studio over the spotlight every time. She married the painter Hap Tivy in 1984. Together they had two sons, Quinn, born in 1986, and Rhys, born in 1990. The marriage lasted nearly 2 decades before they divorced in 2003. The years since then have been lived almost entirely outside the press, in upstate New York, in a routine built around work and family and horses. Her son Quinn has become one of the more publicly active members of the extended Taylor family in recent years, though his public presence is entirely in service of his grandmother's legacy rather than his own profile. He is a trustee of the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation and has spoken in interviews about what Taylor meant to him as a grandmother and what she built in the years when she was fighting for people who had very few other advocates. He was also an executive producer on the 2024 HBO documentary Elizabeth Taylor, The Lost Tapes, which drew on hours of previously unheard audio recordings Taylor had made in the early 1960s. The documentary gave audiences a version of Taylor that was more interior and uncertain than the one they thought they knew, and Quinn's involvement in bringing it to the public was a quiet act of stewardship that felt very much in keeping with who Liza raised him to be. Liza's own story is, in the end, one of a particular kind of survival. She was born into a situation that gave her enormous advantages and an almost impossible set of complications in the same moment. She lost her father before she could form a single memory of him. She grew up inside one of the most relentlessly documented families of the 20th century, while being, by nature and by choice, someone who wanted nothing to do with documentation. She found her way to a form of expression that was hers alone, that carried none of the weight of inheritance, and she has worked within it for decades with a consistency and seriousness that has nothing to do with the name she carries. The story of what happened to Liza Todd is not a dramatic one in the conventional sense. There is no scandal at the center of it, no public crisis, no moment that made the front pages in the way that other parts of her family's story did. What there is instead is a woman who was handed an extraordinary set of circumstances at birth, including the loss of a father she would never know, and who built something genuine and private and her own on the other side of all of it. That is its own kind of remarkable. Michael Howard Wilding Jr. was the first child Elizabeth Taylor ever held. He was born on January the 6th, 1953 in Santa Monica, California, the eldest of 4 children and the one whose story is in some ways the most straightforward, though straightforward is a relative term in a family like this one. His father was Michael Wilding, a British actor who had built a modest but respectable career in British cinema before his marriage to Taylor brought him to Hollywood and, in many ways, undid what he had spent years constructing. Taylor married Michael Wilding Sr. in February 1952 when she was 19 years old. She has described what she wanted from that marriage as something calm, a kind of friendship, a retreat from the relentlessness of a film career that had been moving at full speed since she was a child. Wilding was 16 years older than her, gentle in manner and considerably less certain of himself than she was, a gap that became more pronounced as Taylor grew into her confidence and her fame, and Wilding found his own career stalling in the shadow of hers. By the time Michael Jr. was old enough to be aware of his surroundings, the marriage was already losing its shape. When Taylor left for Texas in 1955 to film Giant, the sprawling George Stevens production that also starred James Dean and Rock Hudson, the distance between husband and wife became something closer to a conclusion. A gossip publication ran a story claiming that Wilding had entertained other women at the family home during her absence. Taylor and Wilding announced their separation in July 1956. The divorce was finalized in January 1957. Michael Jr. was 4 years old. He grew up the way all 4 of Taylor's children did, moving between California and Switzerland and England, attending schools in different countries, adjusting to new environments with a regularity that left little room for the kind of settled childhood that most people take for granted. His father remained in his life but was a diminished presence, a man who had never quite found his footing and who struggled in the years after the marriage ended. His mother was present but surrounded by a life that was growing larger and louder by the year. He was not pushed toward acting, at least not early on. Taylor made efforts to keep the children away from the machinery of the industry, and for much of his boyhood, Michael Jr. lived more quietly than his surname suggested. That changed gradually, and perhaps inevitably. Both he and his younger brother Christopher made their first screen appearances as children in their mother's 1967 film The Taming of the Shrew, which also starred Richard Burton. They were cameos, brief appearances rather than anything substantial, but they were a beginning. In the 1980s, Michael Jr. built a modest and genuine acting career. He appeared in the long-running American soap opera Guiding Light between 1985 and 1988, playing the character Jackson Fremont. He had a role on Dallas in 1989, and in the same year, he appeared alongside his mother in the television film Sweet Bird of Youth. These were not the kinds of roles that generated magazine covers or awards attention, but they were real work, and he took them seriously. His personal life during this period was unconventional by most measures. He had married Beth Clutter in 1970 and they had a daughter, Layla, in 1971. The marriage did not hold as a conventional arrangement, and he later had a second daughter, Naomi, in 1975 with a different partner, Johanna Licciardopulo. For a period, Michael, Beth and Johanna lived together in what was described as a commune arrangement. It attracted some tabloid attention, though Michael largely managed to stay out of the headlines. He married his third partner, Brooke Palance, the daughter of the Oscar-winning actor Jack Palance, in August 1982. Together they had a son, Tarquin Wilding, born in Saint-Inmon in 1989. Tarquin has spoken publicly about his grandmother with evident warmth and pride. In an interview with Town & Country magazine in 2017, he described the family as wacky but caring and sensitive in equal measure, and said he felt fortunate to have been born into it. He has gone on to work in film and has been one of the more vocal members of the family in keeping Taylor's legacy visible. Michael Jr. eventually stepped away from acting and moved towards sculpture, finding in that quieter discipline something that the industry had never quite given him. He maintains a gallery focused on the natural world, work that engages with land, wind and water and the forms they produce over time. He settled in Santa Fe, New Mexico, a long way from Hollywood in every sense. His daughter Naomi spoke to the Today Show in 2021 about the grandmother she remembered, describing Taylor as someone who felt a genuine responsibility toward the younger generations of the family, not just as a famous relative, but as a person actively committed to passing something real down through the family. Michael Jr.'s story is, in the end, a gentler one than some of what follows. He experienced the instability and upheaval that all 4 of the children experienced, and he found his footing eventually, moving through the industry and out the other side into something that suited him more honestly. His brother Christopher's story carries considerably more weight and considerably more heartbreak. Christopher Edward Wilding was born on February the 27th, 1955. That date is the same as his mother's birthday. Elizabeth Taylor turned 23 the day Christopher arrived, making him the 3rd child she had in under 3 years. He was quieter than his brother, less drawn to performance, more naturally suited to the technical and the precise. When he eventually found his place in the film industry, it was not in front of a camera, but behind it, in the sound department, working on the construction of the audio landscape of major Hollywood productions. His credits include Tombstone, Overboard, and The Shadow. It was skilled, steady work, and it kept him almost entirely out of the public eye, which appeared to suit him perfectly. He did appear briefly as a child in The Taming of the Shrew alongside his brother, and he made a small number of other acting appearances, but the industry never claimed him the way it claimed the family name. He eventually settled in Calabasas, California, with his second wife, Margaret Carlton, who is herself a supervising sound editor. But between that quiet adult life and the boyhood of moving between countries lies a marriage that became one of the most dramatic episodes in a family that was never short of them. In 1981, Christopher Wilding married Aileen Getty. Aileen was not simply a young woman from a wealthy background. She was the granddaughter of J. Paul Getty, the oil tycoon who had been described in the 1960s as the richest private individual in the world. She was the daughter of John Paul Getty Jr. and the younger sister of John Paul Getty III, who had been kidnapped in Rome in 1973 at the age of 16 and held for 5 months, until part of his ear was sent to a newspaper as proof that the kidnappers were serious about their demands. The Getty family carried extraordinary wealth and extraordinary damage in proportions that were difficult to separate. Aileen and Christopher eloped to a wedding chapel on the Sunset Strip in August 1981. Their parents were informed. Both Taylor and the Getty family were aware of the marriage before it happened, but the ceremony was deliberately small, a private thing between 2 young people who wanted to belong to each other without the weight of 2 famous families bearing down on them. They had 2 sons together. Caleb was born in 1983 after the couple had struggled to conceive and eventually adopted him. Aileen became pregnant with Andrew shortly after, and Andrew was born in 1985. The family seemed to be finding its shape. Then also in 1985, Aileen received a diagnosis that changed everything. She had tested positive for HIV. This was 1985, when the epidemic was still new enough that very few people understood what the diagnosis meant for a young woman's future. The medical reality was frightening. The social stigma attached to the illness was nearly total. Aileen later described the period immediately after the diagnosis as one of complete collapse. She told Elizabeth Taylor before she told almost anyone else. Taylor was traveling to Paris in her capacity as president of the American Foundation for AIDS Research, and she had brought Aileen along. It was during that trip that Aileen first raised the possibility that she might be infected. Taylor arranged for her to be tested. The results were positive. Aileen later disclosed with striking honesty that she had initially told Christopher the virus had come through a blood transfusion. It was only later that she told him the truth, that it had come through an extramarital affair. That disclosure ended the marriage. Christopher filed for divorce, and by 1987, the marriage was formally over. He was awarded primary custody of their sons. What followed for Aileen was an extraordinarily difficult period. She struggled with addiction to cocaine and alcohol and was hospitalized multiple times. She later described having made 7 attempts at institutionalization, undergone 12 sessions of electroconvulsive therapy, and experienced 7 miscarriages across the course of her life. Her children were temporarily removed from her custody while she sought treatment. She lost them and then fought to get them back. What Elizabeth Taylor did during all of this is one of the more remarkable details in any of the 4 children's stories. When a marriage ends badly under circumstances like those, the natural response for most people is to step back from the former spouse. Taylor did not. She remained close to Aileen. She supported her publicly and privately. Aileen continued to call her mum long after the divorce was finalized. In 2014, Aileen accepted the Elizabeth Taylor Leadership Award at an AIDS fundraiser, and members of both the Getty and Wilding families were present in the audience together. Taylor's work as an AIDS activist, which included co-founding the American Foundation for AIDS Research in 1985 and establishing the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation in 1991, was shaped in direct and personal ways by what she had witnessed through Aileen. The cause was never abstract for her. It had come through her front door first in the form of her daughter-in-law, and everything she did publicly in that fight was informed by what she had seen privately. Christopher rebuilt quietly after the divorce. His sons Caleb and Andrew grew up knowing what their mother had been through, and both have spoken carefully about those years in the limited interviews they have given. Caleb has appeared alongside his mother at HIV and AIDS fundraisers. Andrew went into filmmaking. Christopher found the stability he had been looking for in his second marriage, and his son with Margaret Carlton, Lyle, born in 1992, has spoken about preserving his grandmother's archive and carrying her legacy forward in ways that honor the specific fights she chose to pick. Christopher gave one of the more revealing interviews about his mother after her death in 2011, telling The Hollywood Reporter that Taylor used to let the children play with her Golden Globes when they were young, but not her Oscars. The Oscars were protected. After she died, Christopher took possession of her first Oscar, the one she won for Butterfield 8. He keeps it on a bookshelf in his living room. He added that people had often overlooked Taylor's genuine talent as an actress because of the way she looked, and that she deserved to be remembered for the work. The youngest of Elizabeth Taylor's 4 children did not come into the family by birth. She was found by it, driven by Taylor's instinct and her absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. Maria Burton Carson was born on August 1st, 1961, in Munich, Germany. Her biological mother struggled with her mental health, and her biological father faced serious financial difficulties. Shortly after Maria's birth, she was placed for adoption. What made her situation more pressing was that Maria had been born with a severe congenital hip condition. Her hip joints had not formed correctly, and without significant medical intervention, she would not walk normally. Some sources put the number of surgeries she eventually required at more than 27. Taylor had begun the adoption process while still married to her 4th husband, the singer Eddie Fisher. When that marriage ended in March 1964, the adoption was still legally incomplete. Richard Burton then formally adopted both Maria and Liza Todd as part of the new family. Maria was approximately 3 years old when the process was finalized. Taylor's response to learning about Maria's medical condition before the adoption was completed has been quoted widely. When told about what Maria would need, she said she wanted the child all the more because of it. The years that followed supported that. Taylor was present through surgery after surgery, through recoveries that would have tested most adults. The childhood Maria experienced was shaped significantly by hospitals and procedures, but Taylor's involvement was described by those around the family as hands-on and genuine. Maria grew up between California, Switzerland, and wherever Burton and Taylor happened to be filming. She was kept out of the press as much as possible, attended private schools, and was not pushed toward acting or modeling. In her 20s, she explored fashion design and later started a talent agency with her first husband, Steve Carson. Together they had a daughter, Eliza, born in 1982. That marriage ended in the late 1990s. A second marriage to Tom McCon also ended in difficulty, and in 2004, Maria moved with her young son to Taylor's home. Taylor took her side without hesitation and without any public statement in her own defense. Maria has lived in Idaho for many years. She is a clothing designer and a philanthropist who supports the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation without seeking recognition for it. Her daughter Eliza works in social work in Manhattan with the Department of Child Protection, carrying her grandmother's values into a professional life built around protecting children who have no one else. It is a quietly striking detail that the granddaughter of the most photographed woman of the 20th century spends her days largely unknown, doing work that has nothing to do with glamour. Taylor died on March 23rd, 2011, in Los Angeles from congestive heart failure. She was 79 years old. Her 4 children had gathered around her in the preceding years. They had said what needed to be said. The family she had held together across 7 marriages, 4 different fathers, an AIDS crisis, divorces, surgeries, and 1 plane crash over New Mexico was still standing. What is most striking looking at all 4 lives together is how differently each of them chose to carry everything forward. A sculptor in Santa Fe, a sound editor in California, a bronze artist in upstate New York, a clothing designer in Idaho. None of them had easy lives. They were handed extraordinary advantages and extraordinary complications in equal measure, and they each had to work out, in their own time, what to do with both. Elizabeth Taylor's story has been told many times, but the story of what her 4 children went through and who they became is the one worth sitting with.